Hello everyone and welcome back to Mikey Reacts. Today we've got another history reaction for you. As you know, I recently did a video on the loss of life, or the fallen of World War II, where it visually showed us how many people died in comparison, and sort of visually how many people died during the Second World War, and it was really eye-opening and mind-blowing, to be honest with you. So we thought we would carry on that kind of series, and we're going to react to a channel called Real Life Lore. They've got like nearly 7 million subscribers, sorry, and this is called The Loss of Life in World War I Visualized. So this should be extremely eye-opening too. It's a bit of a shorter video. As you know, the conflict in the First World War, there was less life lost. However, the type of conflict was extremely brutal due to the fact that we were using the old tactics of charging at fixed positions. However, we were using new technology such as machine guns, long-range artillery, tanks, and planes. So that made it they essentially became killing fields, such as the Battle of the Somme and Passchendaele, etc. So let's have a look and see what this is all about. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like this video, and have a look in the description for links to my Instagram, Twitter, and Patreon, where you can find more historical and political content, stuff that I won't really be showing here on YouTube. So let's have a look at this. Oh yes, of course, that is exclusive content, just so you know. So let's hit play on this. Got it right here. Okay, fantastic. Let's go.
This video is made possible by Skillshare. Learn anything you want to learn with Skillshare for free for 2 months at skl.sh/reallifelore18. I purposefully released this video on the 9th of November 2018. 2 days from now, on the 11th of November, will mark exactly 100 years since the end of the First World War, one of the most destructive and violent wars ever fought in human history.
Oh, yeah.
While the Second World War and the destruction it caused often overshadow the First World War, I felt like now would be a good time to remember and visualize the enormous loss of life that the Great War caused. We'll be counting soldiers and civilians separately, as well as deaths and injuries separately. A casualty can be a confusing statistic in war because it means that a soldier has been taken out of action, but not necessarily killed. Each of these models represents 1,000 people who died or went missing, while each of these models represents 1,000 people who were injured, which when combined equal the number of casualties.
Okay.
And we'll begin the counting with the United States. Over 116,000 soldiers died, and another 204,000 were injured fighting against the Germans and Austrians on the Western Front. This amounted to 0.17% of the American population at the time becoming a casualty of war. But America only fought for a little over a year between 1917 and 1918. The war had already been going on for over 2.5.
Guys, that's 150,000 men lost in a year of fighting. That is brutal. You consider that in the Second World War, I think the US lost 400,000. So actually, it's creeping up.
Years before that. So let's take a look at some of the countries who were fighting from the beginning. The war began when Austria-Hungary declared war against Serbia in 1914, and Serbia suffered worse than any other country during the war.
Really?
375,000 Serb soldiers lost their lives in the fighting, while another 625,000 civilians died from famine and disease.
Damn.
That amounted to over 22% of the Serbian population dying during the 4-year-long war.
That's
more than 1 out of every 5 people in the country. Serbia was a member of one of the 2 alliances that fought against one another in the war called the Entente, which also included the United Kingdom, France, Russia, Italy, America, and many others, all of whom would suffer terribly. The United Kingdom would send over 815,000 soldiers to their graves. Like on the first day,
815,000 soldiers. We lost 800,000 men dead. I didn't know it was that much. That's more than the Second World War. I'm sure that's more than the Second World War. That was brutal.
the Battle of the Somme, in which 19,000 would die in only 24 hours. The bloodiest single day in British history. Over 123,000 British civilians also lost their lives during the war, totaling up to just over 2% of the British population, or about 1 in every 50 people dying. But many more were wounded. 1,675,000 more soldiers, which adds together to 5.77% of the UK population then, becoming casualties of the war.
Wow.
Subjects of the British Empire like Australia, Canada, New Zealand, India, and South Africa also fought in the war and took high casualties.
Yeah.
Percentage-wise, New Zealand suffered the worst, losing 3.8% of her population as wartime casualties, while numbers-wise, Australia took the hardest hit, losing over 61,000 of her soldiers and suffering another 152,000 wounded, with Canada and India both not too far behind.
Australia was mostly, that was at Suvla Bay, Turkey, Gallipoli, which ironically Gallipoli in its direct translation to Greek translates as a good city. So.
But the other major Entente powers lost an incredible amount more. The Italians joined the war in 1915, but in 3 years of fighting suffered 555,000 military fatalities, along with 592,000 civilian deaths. Another 947,000 Italian soldiers became wounded, representing 5.8% of the Italian population becoming casualties, a figure roughly comparable to the UK percentage. But then there's Russia and France, both of whom suffered higher casualties than the entire Serbian population combined during the war. Russia was the first country to come to Serbia's defense during the war and suffered catastrophic losses. 1,977,000 soldiers died fighting against the Central Powers, while another 1,140,000 civilians lost their lives. But Russia suffered vastly higher injuries. 4,350,000 soldiers were wounded during the fighting, which together represents 2.5% of the Russian population that became casualties. These enormous losses eventually helped contribute to Russia's spiral into revolution and their surrender in the war early into 1917.
And obviously the killing of Prince Nicholas. King Nicholas? Was it King? Yeah. The Romanovs.
Percentage-wise, the Allied country that suffered during the war the most, besides Serbia, was France. By the way, sorry to pause again, but did you know that basically all the royal families that were involved in the First World War were all related? So obviously the King of Russia and Queen Elizabeth were cousins, so he was her uncle, should I say. That was the very same with the Kaiser of Germany, who was the cousin of each of those monarchs. So it's crazy to think, really. The Western Front took place in northeastern France and Belgium, and during 4 years of fighting, 1,377,000 French soldiers gave up their lives in defense of their country, along with 340,000 civilian fatalities. This represented a loss of life for 4.3% of the entire French population, but many more were wounded. 4,266,000 additional French soldiers were wounded or maimed by the war, representing a total casualty amount similar to Russia's, but from a much smaller population. In total, around 15% of France's population became a casualty during the First World War. A horrible loss of life that wouldn't be fully recovered 20 years later at the start of the Second World War. Other Entente countries in order of wartime casualties include Romania, which also suffered terribly at 10.4% of their population becoming casualties, as well as Greece, Belgium, Portugal, Montenegro, and Japan, with only about 1,000 casualties during the entire war. But now let's take a look at the other side, the Central Powers, which were led by Germany.
This is a break.
Hey, I'm Ian from Hacksmith Industries. I've been using the new Daily Ideas tool from vidIQ, and my views are up.
Germany was fighting on two fronts for most of the war and also suffered cataclysmic losses. 2,037,000 of her soldiers died fighting in the west and the east, and 594,000 of her civilians died largely due to starvation caused by the Allied blockade of the country. Another 2.5 million German soldiers were wounded during the course of the war, amounting to 7.8% of Germany's population becoming a casualty. While Germany suffered the highest raw numbers of the Central Powers casualties, she didn't suffer the highest percentage-wise. While Austria-Hungary
Austria-Hungary
took less casualties overall, they represented a higher proportion of that empire's population, 10.77%. Over 1.3 million soldiers
Guys, I think it's 10.77%. I don't know why he's saying 77. That's really annoying me.
were killed and another 3.6 million injured, all of which helps to explain why the Austro-Hungarian Empire itself wasn't able to survive the war. But the worst suffering on the Central Powers side occurred inside of the Ottoman Empire, and most of it was self-inflicted. The Ottomans joined the war in 1915 and suffered
Wrong side of history, the same way they're on the wrong side of history now. You know, they are part of NATO, but they don't really seem to be playing ball. They're buying troops, they're buying equipment from Russia, like S-300s that are capable of shooting down NATO planes. So, in fact, the US administration that was going to sell Turkey F-35s actually rerouted them to Greece and refused selling F-35s to Turkey because they're really not playing ball, they're really not one of us anymore. And they always seem to be on the wrong side of history. If you look at World War I, they stayed. You'll see what happens. I don't know if they'll tell you how bad it was, but they really were supporting the Germans here.
148,000 military fatalities and another 582,000 wounded fighting against mostly the British, French, and the Russians. But absurdly high civilian deaths inside of the Ottoman Empire
And the Australians.
were largely due to the Ottoman government's policy of ethnic cleansing against her Armenian, Greek, and Assyrian ethnic minorities. Collectively known as the Armenian Genocide, 1.5 million Armenians.
Oh, by the way, the Armenian genocide denied by the Ottomans. The German government makes it illegal to deny the Holocaust. The Ottoman or the Turkish government, as it currently stands, basically denies the very existence of the Armenian genocide, which existed and it happened.
Were systematically killed by the Ottoman government during and shortly after the war, along with 600,000 Greeks and 225,000 Assyrians. Accounting for all of this, in addition to the military casualties, an enormous 17% of the Ottoman Empire's population was killed or wounded.
It'd be forgivable if they would admit that it happened and we can all get over it, but they're still denying its very existence
during the conflict, which can also help to explain why this empire too didn't survive long after the war was over. And finally, Bulgaria was another member of this alliance that suffered greatly as well, with 6.8% of their population becoming casualty victims of the Great War. In total, and across all countries, about 9 million soldiers lost their lives, as well as 7 million civilians. 36% of all deaths were Entente military, 22% were the Central Powers military, another 22% were Central Powers civilians, and the final 20% were Entente civilians. The First World War was, and still remains, the bloodiest war ever fought in the history of the United Kingdom, France, Italy, Belgium, Bulgaria, Romania, Serbia, Turkey, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. The Second World War was actually not as bad for all of these mentioned countries, but it would be worse for others like Russia and Germany. Hopefully, after
the
two
US.
terrible lessons during the 20th century, humanity will never forget what can happen when we let our differences get the better of us. Lessons of any kind are valuable for both societies and for individuals. And if you made it all the way through this video to here, it's clear that you enjoy learning. So why not learn even more about anything you want to by going over to Skillshare next.
Well, look, guys, the First War wasn't caused by differences. It was caused by monarchs and dukes messing around and playing God with the continent of Europe. It was over the assassination of one man. Imagine starting a war over the assassination of one man. The arrogance that one must feel to start such a war that would decimate 20% of the 10% of the European population, destroy towns, livelihoods, cities, and entire countries, and rip families apart because of one man who was shot in the street. And that wasn't an innocent man either. He was a bit of Franz Ferdinand, that is Duke Franz Ferdinand. So, absolutely ridiculous. This was the old times where generals, military generals, especially in the UK, was done by a class system. It wasn't anything to do with ability, and they were not really at risk. They never had to go over the top. They would just send their men out wave after wave. I mean, how stupid can you be, right? That when you send out 2,000 men, right, and all but 3 of them are cut down by machine gun fire, why are you going to send out another 2,000 men? What's the point? Does that make any sense? No. So why do you keep doing it? Just stop. Like, I don't get that. Right? These people, they're higher class. They thought themselves to be smarter. Right? Stop digging the trench. Flank the position. Do something. Send out smaller teams. Why? Anyway, ridiculous. Tactical idiocy. Right? You know, it's a machine gun, guys. Yeah, it's not a musket. So stop running at it. Well, no, it's not their fault. Stop telling them to run at it. Ridiculous. When you got something that's shooting 600 rounds a minute, and you're asking, and you've got 15, 20 of them on a 1 mile stretch of off-front line, and you're asking men to run directly through it, through ditches, through water, through over other dead humans. They're not going to make it to the other side. You've got to contend with the barbed wire first. It's ridiculous. It's just not going to happen. And what happens if? This is what I don't get. Okay, fine. Say 2,000 men are sent out, and 1,900 perish. So you've got 100 men make it to the enemy's line. What are 100 men going to do when they reach those trenches against a force of 4,000? So it was ridiculous to me. It was a futile war, yeah, fought by incredibly brave men and started by idiots, absolute European monarchist idiots. And they're all cousins, right? They were all bloody cousins. Do you know what I mean? So sorry, but you know, come on, man. Anyway, that's my rant over. I'm gonna leave you with that. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe. It's really annoyed me, like obviously how ridiculous the First World War was. All that loss of life of brave young men, some of who lied to go and serve their country, and you treat them with such little respect that you send them into, you use them as cannon fodder. You use human life as cannon fodder to go charge a machine gun firing 8mm Mauser as if they're gonna survive. Do you know what I mean? But anyway, I'll leave you with that. Thank you very much, guys. Have a great day, and I'll see you on the next one.